From Northwest Public TV, Northwest Public Radio, and the Foley Institute at Washington State University, this is Election 2016, the 5th Congressional District Debate. Live from Washington State University. Here now, the moderator for tonight, Cornell Clayton from the Foley Institute.
Good evening from the campus of Washington State University in Pullman. I'm Cornell Clayton, the director of the Thomas S. Foley Institute, and your moderator for tonight's debate between Congresswoman Cathy McMorris Rodgers and her 5th Congressional District challenger, Joe Pakootas. In 1995, the Foley Institute was established to honor the service of Thomas S. Foley, the former Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, who served in Congress for over 30 years representing the citizens of the 5th Congressional District. The Institute's mission is to encourage young people to pursue careers in public service and to educate the public about public policy and the function of our democratic institutions. So it's a great honor for us to host tonight's debate together with our partners at Northwest Public Television and Northwest Public Radio. The rules and format of tonight's debate were agreed upon by the candidates previously. The debate will consist of 3 rounds. In the first round, I will ask each candidate 2 questions. Answers will be limited to 2 minutes and responses 1 minute and 30 seconds with a 45-second rebuttal period. In the second round, each candidate will respond to a question submitted by their opponent. And then in the third round, there will be 4 questions drawn from our audience. Finally, the debate will conclude with closing statements from each of the candidates. Before we get to the questions, let me give you a little background about our candidates this evening. Incumbent Congresswoman Cathy McMorris Rodgers grew up in Kettle Falls and received an executive MBA from the University of Washington. Representative McMorris Rodgers was first elected to Congress in 2004, and she is seeking a 7th term. Before serving in Congress, McMorris Rodgers was in the state legislature. Cathy and her husband Brian have 3 children. Democratic challenger Joe Pakootas grew up in Inchelium on the Colville Reservation and received his executive MBA from the University of Washington. He is a small business owner, and he has served as the Chief Executive Officer for the Colville Confederated Tribes and also for 5 years as tribal chairman. Joe and his wife, Cheryl, have 4 children and 7 grandchildren. In the interest of time tonight, we're going to ask that you hold all your applause during the debate, except for now, as we welcome our candidates onto stage. Based on a coin flip earlier this evening, the opening statement will first be given by Joe Pakootas.
Good evening. Thank you very much for inviting us here tonight. I want to thank the Thomas Foley Institute for hosting us, and also Washington State University. It's a pleasure to be here tonight with you. I'm Joe Pakootas. I have been born and raised here in Eastern Washington, lived nearly my entire life here in Eastern Washington. Born or raised in Inchelium, Washington. I have 16 years as a political figure on our tribal council, and also 5 years as their chairman. My wife and I owned and operated our own small business in our community for 30 years. I have served as a CEO for 3 entities now, not only Colville Tribe, but Nez Perce Tribe, and now the Spokane Tribe. When I was CEO for the Colville Tribes, I ushered in a $10 million turnaround in 9 short months. I accomplished this through smart business practices, cutting waste, and streamlining processes. In 2006, I led a landmark lawsuit against a Canadian mining company that was polluting Lake Roosevelt and the Columbia River. Environmental protection is important to me, but I know that it's not at the expense of good jobs also. We can have both. My wife and I for years have been heavily involved in our community, providing a safe home for children, and mentoring through coaching and sporting activities. The actions of our Congress today do not provide a bright future for our young people. Today's Congress is on pace to set another record. That record to be the most ineffective Congress in history. The last 3 years have each set records of declining effectiveness. Our legislators are so gridlocked that they cannot even pass a budget every year. When our government shut down in 2014, the damage was to the American people. Congress is in session only 112 days out of the year. This gives them so little time that they cannot perform their functions within Congress, much less quickly addressing some issues, major issues like the Zika virus.
Mr. Pakootas, can you wrap it up, or your time's up?
Oh, I thought we had 3 minutes.
2 minutes.
Okay, I'm sorry. As you can see, it's obvious we need new leadership. I am qualified and willing to take on the challenge. My goal is not to gain political power. My goal is to take Congress work and take into Congress and make it work for you. Tonight, I hope to gain your trust and also provide why we should desperately need new representation in Congress.
Thank you. McMorris Rodgers.
Thank you to the Foley Institute for hosting this debate, and thank you, Joe, and thank you everyone for being here. It's great to be at WSU. I was here on Saturday for the big win. Go Cougs. It's an honor for me to represent you in the United States House of Representatives, and I work hard every day to be worthy of the trust that you have given me. I think it begins by listening, and whether it's the many conversations with Cathy, the town halls that I host, the letters, the emails, the social media in which we engage, I listen and I learn from the people through all of those interactions, whether it's a wheat farmer who's having trouble with crop insurance, a veteran who's waiting for medical care, a young woman who's starting her new business, or the WSU administrators and students. And then I take what I have learned and I advocate and lead on your behalf. It is my goal to be your voice and to be an effective voice in the people's house. I hear that people are angry with Congress. They are frustrated with the federal government. I want to take that and turn it into really smart solutions, and that's where you see on many issues I am leading, whether it's working right now with Senator Cantwell on forestry issues. We've seen catastrophic fires in eastern Washington, and Senator Cantwell and I are working on legislation that will provide the resources that we need to prevent and fight fires. I was passing the Farm Bill, and helping our farmers is very important. Agriculture is the number one agriculture is the number one industry in eastern Washington, and it's important that the Farm Bill provides the resources for research here at WSU. I'm also excited about the medical school WSU is building in Spokane. I've worked across the aisle to get the ABLE Act passed to provide tax-free savings accounts for those with disabilities. It was a priority for me to get the Steve Gleason Act passed when the federal government was threatening to take away important speech communication. I directed speech communication devices, and yet federal agencies were going to take that away. And we stepped in and we stopped that. But it's a sign that the people's priorities are not being reflected in their federal government. My goal, and the reason that I ask for your continued support, is to continue to serve and be your voice in the people's house and to lead on the important reforms that we need in this country.
All right, thank you very much. I just want to remind our candidates that we have colors up here, so when it goes to yellow, that means you have 15 seconds left, and when it goes red, your time's up. So our first question tonight is going to go to Congresswoman Cathy McMorris Rodgers. In 2010, you signed a pledge opposing carbon taxes. Do you believe climate change is man-made, and do you still oppose carbon taxes? What specific policies would you support to reduce greenhouse gases and promote renewable energy?
Well, I believe that we need to be good stewards, and that is being good stewards so that we leave a healthier environment for the next generation. And I believe each one of us has an important role to play in that. Where you've seen me leading is on hydropower, being a champion for hydropower, which provides 70% of the electricity right here in Washington State. It is clean, it's renewable, it's reliable, it's affordable. And we could double hydropower without building a new dam because of new technology. It's really exciting to see what new technology is doing across the board, but including in hydropower, where we have new fish ladders, new improved fish ladders, where we're seeing record fish returns now coming up the Columbia and Snake River systems. So I've led on that. Last Congress, we were successful. I was successful in leading on getting legislation passed for small hydropower projects, 10 megawatts or less, technology where you can put a device in an irrigation canal or an ocean wave and generate electricity. Or this Congress, I'm working in a bipartisan fashion again, this time with Jerry McNerney, who's a Democrat out of California. We both are on the Energy Conference Committee, along with Senator Maria Cantwell, looking at how we can streamline the permitting process. This is a renewable, clean source of energy that can help meet America's important energy needs moving forward, and I've been a champion for that, and I will continue to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Pakootas, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you. Whether Congress wants to admit it or not, human activity is somewhat responsible for climate change today. I believe the 91% of the scientists that agree with that also. Recently, in the last 10 years, or within 10 of the last 16 years, we've had some record heats in northeastern Washington or northwest Washington. And it's been a concern and problem. I think it's showed up every year. The last 3 years, we've had record fires, wildfires in eastern Washington. And it's damaged thousands or millions of acres. Last year alone, there was 1.5 million acres burning at one time in eastern Washington because of climate change, because of the immense heats that we're having. We do have hydro energy. We've had hydropower for many, many years. And these salmon runs have been stopped for over 50 years now. And they cannot make it past Grand Coulee Dam. We've got methods right now. We can get them up to and over Chief Joseph Dam. But the final stage would be getting them over Chief Joseph or Grand Coulee Dam, and that's not we're not capable of doing that at this day and age. But we need to look at alternative sources of energy. The major source of pollutions in carbon is our fossil fuels. And we're pretty much dependent upon that. And we need to stop our dependence. We can look at alternative energy sources, like wind, solar, and also looking in as rather than burning the fossil fuels, looking at biodiesel, biofuels that are made from the products that come off the earth. And they are pretty safe and sound, and they do not contribute as much to the climate and the carbon, adding carbons into the air.
Okay, time is up. Congresswoman, you have 45 seconds to rebut.
Well, I think it's a great story as to the role that hydropower has played, the Columbia Snake River system, in growing our economy here in eastern Washington. And there's more potential. And I think that's the way that we should look at it. It doesn't have to be an either or, that we can be promoting these existing resources for electricity and growing them. I'm also working on biomass. When you look at the condition of our forest, there's a lot of potential for increasing biomass electricity. And again, working in a bipartisan fashion, right now on the Energy Committee to get language included that will promote biomass as a renewable source of energy.
Our next question goes to Mr. Pakootas. According to a recent survey by the Pew organization, 60% of Americans want to limit U.S. military involvement in the Middle East. Yet many believe that the administration's policies in Syria have been a failure, helping to create a humanitarian crisis and a refugee problem in Europe. What should be U.S. policy in Syria going forward, and would you support the use of U.S. ground forces to defeat ISIS?
That's a tough issue, and I'm not really a whole lot familiar with some of the instances that are going on in the Middle East. And I do support the President and the administration's policies and procedures that they have in place today. And they've been taking a diplomatic approach, which should be the approach that we take, not necessarily going in there and fighting war and creating war and carpet bombing and some of the other instances that you're hearing from some of the presidential candidates today. I would be opposed to increasing ground forces to fight ISIS. One of the approaches that's been fairly successful is the drone strikes, and there's issue with that for some people too. But one of the ways that we can make sure that there's not so many casualties of war, so to speak, of the innocent people, is to depend a little bit more on our intelligence and make sure our intelligence is up to date. So we actually know where the targets are that we're going to be striking. ISIS has been a big issue, and you're hearing that President Obama and Hillary Clinton is the cause of ISIS. ISIS was created with going into war in Iraq. And some of the rhetoric that's going on today is also helping them to recruit more terrorists, not only here in the United States, but in other countries. So as far as ISIS, I wouldn't support additional ground troops in there to fight them. And as looking at what's going on also with many of the refugees coming out of Syria and going into other countries, we are a nation of immigrants here in the United States. And I can tell you that, honestly. The population is over 308 or 320 million, and there's over 315 million immigrants in the United States. And we have no problem in accepting and making, as long as there's a clear vetting process before we bring these individuals in the United States.
Thank you. Congresswoman, you have a minute and a half.
Okay, thanks. I think it's really heartbreaking to see what has happened in the Middle East because of the lack of leadership on behalf of America. And over the recent years, you think about what has happened in Iraq, in Syria. In Syria, nearly half of the people have been displaced. They're fleeing the country. The conditions in which they're living, the chemical weapons that have been used against them is really heartbreaking, and it is wrong. And even though red lines were drawn, the United States failed to take action. And the United States needs to lead. And it doesn't mean that we do it on our own. We do it with a coalition, but we need to be a part of making sure that we are taking action to provide the stability. Unfortunately, there was no status of forces agreement for Iraq. I believe that we left prematurely, and it allowed ISIS to build up and gain strength now that is unfortunately making them stronger and making them a larger threat to this country. When it comes to the Syrian refugees, I believe that we should be supporting them, and we can support them without bringing them to this country. It is clear the FBI director himself told us that he does not have the ability to vet them the way they should be. And so I have supported legislation that would put a halt to that program until we know that they are vetted.
Okay, Mr. Pakootas, you have 45 seconds to rebut.
You hear lack of leadership is the reason for ISIS growing. A couple of years ago, when President Obama had requested Congress to come in and vote on whether or not to go into Iraq or Syria and start the battle with ISIS, Congress decided not to do that. They went on vacation. And President Obama had to make the decision on his own. Congress is not doing the job or the work of the people, so the president has to do that. So lack of leadership isn't only with the president and the administration. Lack of leadership is within Congress and the Senate.
Okay, thank you. So our next question is to Mr. Pakootas, or excuse me, to Congresswoman Cathy McMorris Rodgers. Marijuana has been legalized in a growing number of states, yet the federal government continues to treat it as a Schedule I narcotic, making it hard for states to run and regulate the industry and difficult for universities to conduct research into the effects of cannabis. Should the federal government follow Washington's lead and decriminalize marijuana? And if not, what would you do to help public universities conduct research in this important area?
Right. Well, I recognize that marijuana has been legalized in 2 states for recreational marijuana. That's Colorado and Washington State. As a mom, I have serious concerns about access of marijuana to children, and that is why I have not supported changing at the federal level the definition of marijuana. Now, to the question as to the research, I believe that research, we can conduct that research without having to change the designation. And in fact, I believe that we need to do more research and better understand what the impact of making this action is going to be before we change that federal law.
Mr. Pakootas, you have a minute and a half.
I do support the declassification of marijuana as a Schedule I drug. The reason being is because it's costing the federal government, actually taxpayers, quite a bit of money to be incarcerating many people of color in that area. Washington State and Colorado is going to be a great pilot program, be a great test to see just where the federal government should fit into this picture. I have seen how marijuana has worked as far as medical use. My father-in-law was terminally ill, and he was on prescription drugs, hard drugs, and he basically become You know, he wouldn't want to get out of bed or anything. And he heard about the medical marijuana, and he decided to try that. So I just happened to have a brother that used to smoke marijuana. So he called him up, and he come down, and he become my stepfather's best friend after that. The quality of life that he lived after that was unbelievable. And he had no more pain, and he was able to get out of bed. He wasn't lethargic anymore. So I've seen how medical marijuana works. And as far as a recreational drug, I'm still, I'm still up in the air about that. I never used drugs before in my life.
Okay, time is up.
Certainly.
Thank you. Congresswoman, you have 45 seconds.
And, you know, I've listened to people in Eastern Washington. I've heard from educators the concern about how easier access is right now and the impact that that's having on young people. I visited a entity just recently that is helping not just those that are battling with marijuana, but meth and other prescription drugs and the abuse that we see taking place and how heartbreaking that is. I think before we start changing this law at the federal level, we do need to do more research. We need to understand, and we need to make sure that we have laws in place that are going to protect people and families. And as a mom, I'm very concerned about children and what that means to families moving forward.
Thank you. Our next question goes to Mr. Pakootas. Last year, Washington State decreased the cost of in-state tuition. However, the cost of higher education continues to rise. Student loan debt in the United States is now over $1 trillion, posing a financial threat to individual students and to the nation as a whole. What should the federal government do to make college more accessible and affordable, and what should be done to help students with their existing loan debts?
I like what Bernie Sanders had talked about and Hillary Clinton is talking about is eventually having free tuition, free college. And, you know, it's going to be tough with Congress today to get that approved. But that's something we can look at into the future. One thing that Congress can do today is reduce the interest rates or possibly waive interest for a lot of these students that are in debt and allow them to refinance their debt. That would help them out greatly. Right now, it's about $1.3 trillion is the debt, federal debt. And I understand about 29% of that is being paid back. So eventually, that's going to create a bubble that's going to burst. And that's going to damage our federal budget, and it's going to put us further into debt at that situation. So I'd be in favor of allowing the students to refinance their debt. And what that's going to do also is allow them to go into further debt once they get out of school to buy mortgage or buy a home and actually start a family. Today, they don't have that option. Many of the students that come out of college, they cannot get the job that they trained for or wanted in their career. So they have to take a lesser job, and then they cannot afford paying their debt back. There is ways to do that. Federal government has a way with Indian Health Service where they allow doctors to come into rural communities and work there for a period of time, and they can work off their debt. If they stay there for 5 years, 6 years, then they're debt-free. They don't have to pay their debt back to the federal government at that point in time, but they also provided a necessary service in a very rural area where these medical, where dental and health care are basically non-existent.
Thank you. Congresswoman, you have a minute and a half.
I believe they say that 85% of the jobs moving forward are going to require some kind of post-secondary education. And I think that having access to college, whatever it may be, 2-year, 4-year, or beyond, needs to be a priority, and ensuring that no matter who you are, that you feel like you can make that happen. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, and it meant figuring out how I was going to pay for it. I'm still paying off loans from when I went back to school and got my MBA. And I'm grateful for the loans and the grants that were available to make that happen. You know, I recently met with the university and college presidents from Eastern Washington. So this was Washington State University, Eastern, Gonzaga, Whitworth, Whitman, college, the community colleges. And you know, the very first issue that they talked to me about was the regulations coming out of the Department of Education that were making it more difficult for them, that was increasing cost and also limiting the programs that they could make available, that they weren't understanding the uniqueness of the institutions. And you think about those colleges and universities, and we value each one of them and the roles that they play and the opportunities that they provide young people in Eastern Washington. In Congress, I have worked on the Perkins loan in particular. Congress's role is largely loans and grants. The Perkins loan is targeting first generation, and I've worked hard to make sure that it continues.
Thanks. Mr. Pakootas, 45 seconds.
We have many students in here. I imagine there's quite a few of them that are burdened with debt already, some freshmen, sophomores, and then before they actually even graduate. You heard that it's the regulations that restrict a lot of that. And it's not actually the regulation that restrict a lot of that. It's Congress that is restricting that. They have the opportunity, they have the option to actually help a lot of our students and doing just exactly what I was talking about earlier. And you know, they're not willing to do that. That's something that the students are in dire need of today. So I'd be in support of Congress actually helping the students out where they actually can do something for them and not mess with the regulations that we do have in place today.
All right, thank you. So we're now into the second round where the candidates will ask each other a question. The first question will come from Mr. Pakootas.
In 2013, the House Ethics Committee conducted an investigation and found you violated rules by using official government funds, staff, office space to enhance your political career. This investigation is ongoing. Due to evidence uncovered of your retribution against a staff member who exposed this violation, testimony revealed you repeatedly denied wrongdoing and perpetuated a culture of dishonesty among your staff. You're working to gain the public's trust again. How can the public trust you when these charges remain unresolved?
Well, just from the very beginning, I have fully cooperated with this investigation. I believe as a public official that it is important that I hold myself to the highest ethical standards, and that is the way that I've always conducted myself. I believe that I need to be an example, and we're still working through getting this one resolved.
Okay. You have 45 seconds to rebut.
They haven't been working very hard on it at all. It's been going on for 2 years now. And I know you're cooperating, but the individuals that are actually conducting the hearing or in charge of the ethics committee are kind of dragging their feet on it. So I think that's where the process is the leadership and the lack of, I guess, initiative to bring this forward.
Let me remind the audience to hold your applause till the end of the debate. Our next question is from Congresswoman Cathy McMorris Rodgers.
Okay. President Obama negotiated an agreement with Iran designed to delay Iran's nuclear program. Do you support the president's actions, and how do you think we should deal with Iran and Israel in the Middle East?
I certainly do support his actions, and if you take a look at what was going on, and they're getting pretty close to actually developing and building nuclear weapons. And if this hadn't happened, they would be a lot closer to that. They were getting all the materials that were necessary to actually do the building. And they've been doing this for a number of years, and we haven't been able to observe or investigate or see what was going on. And this opened up the doors for that. It's actually stopped them from developing a nuclear weapon. And it's actually made Syria safer and Israel safer too. And you know, they're one of our greatest allies, and we want to make sure that they're protected. This has only delayed that process, but also in the next few years, you know, before they actually, the agreement is over, we can start working with them and institute the sanctions once again and put more pressure on them to continue to stop their nuclear weapon process.
Thank you. 45 seconds to rebut.
Well, I do not support this agreement. And I believe, unfortunately, it's going to have the opposite effect of actually putting Iran on a path to gain a nuclear weapon, which will mean that the largest state sponsor of terrorism will now have nuclear weapons. And I'm very much dismayed to know that the administration made a cash payment to Iran in the midst of this, which is wrong, and it means that it only puts the agreement in further questions for many of us that are in the House and in the Senate.
Okay, we're now into the third round where we have questions coming from the audience. Our first question goes to Mr. Pakootas. The Affordable Care Act has successfully reduced the number of uninsured Americans, and many of its individual provisions, such as the requirement that insurers must cover pre-existing conditions, remain very popular. But both parties agree that some changes to the Act need to be made. What elements of the Act do you think need to be amended?
I think what needs to come back into the Affordable Care Act is the public option and the ability to negotiate for lower drug prices with the pharmaceutical companies. If you go back to the beginning of the Affordable Care Act and how it was all written, and all of this was written into it to begin with, and it was a great legislation bill for the American people. And President Obama wanted some assistance, wanted some help from the Republican Party. So what he did is he gave them a shot at it, let them take a look at it so he could get some support and possibly have their support in voting for it. Well, they watered it down. They took all those options out completely. And when it come to a vote, did a single Republican vote for it? I believe there's only one, maybe, that voted for it, yet it passed. And we have the watered-down version that the Republicans had proposed and put on the table. Yet they voted over 60 times to repeal the act and take the health care away from the 20 million Americans that have health care for the first time in their lives. There's still about 29 million Americans that do not have health care. And that affects many of our young people too. One of the other options that is good in there still that they're trying to remove is the option of our children staying on their parents' health care insurance until they're 26 years old. Those are things that are being helpful for our young people, especially. Look at our college students. If they didn't have that capability or ability, it would be even much more burdensome for them.
Thank you. Congresswoman, a minute and a half.
Well, unfortunately, the Affordable Care Act is anything but affordable. It's a false promise. And we were told that if you liked your health insurance, you'd be able to keep it. That's not true. Health insurance rates have gone up. Right here in Washington State, we're seeing double-digit health insurance rate increases. I support the pre-existing condition. I support allowing those up to 26 to stay on their parents' health insurance plans. But I believe that we need to provide more options within the marketplace for individuals and families to be able to go out there and make choices that are going to best meet the needs of themselves and their families. So I would like to see the individual mandate repealed, the employer mandate repealed, the regulations on the states repealed, so that we can open up a marketplace here where in Washington State you would have more choices within the marketplace and you'd be able to find the plans that are going to best meet your needs. That is the way that we empower individuals and families, and that's the way that we're going to bring the accountability and the transparency that we need in the healthcare system too.
45 seconds to rebut.
Yeah, this is challenging. Healthcare is a right and not a privilege for the people in the United States. They have tried to repeal this bill for a number of times, number of years, and they've always said that they had a replacement that was going to be just as good or better. And that replacement hasn't been drafted or even written at this point in time. We were at that place where insurance companies controlled the market, where we had to go out and buy insurance, and that's why we're in the situation that we are today, why many people do not have health care. Many people are denied health care, sometimes because of pre-existing conditions. Affordable Care Act has stopped that. As you heard from Congresswoman McMorris Rodgers, that she supports that. And that needs to stay.
Time is up. Thank you. Our next question from the audience goes to Congresswoman McMorris Rodgers. Last fall, the Planned Parenthood clinic here in Pullman was attacked by an arsonist. Republicans have tried to defund that organization. But for many women, Planned Parenthood is the only source of family planning and other necessary health care services. As a member of Congress, how will you ensure that women have access to safe and affordable reproductive health care?
Well, first of all, when there's any kind of attack, like what was happened on Planned Parenthood's site here in Pullman, it's not right. It's unacceptable, and I would never condone that. In Congress, and it is the federal law that there's no taxpayer funding for abortion. And really the debate over Planned Parenthood has centered around whether or not taxpayer dollars are being used to fund abortions. The effort that was made this last year to ensure that policy was implemented was to provide those services through federally qualified clinics. There's actually more federally qualified clinics in Washington State and across the country that would open their doors to women that are in need and provide important health care services that will meet their needs. And it's a way to ensure then that taxpayer dollars are not being used to fund abortions.
A minute and a half.
I support the Planned Parenthood, and I support women's rights to choice. I don't believe that politicians should be making that choice for a woman. I believe that that choice should be made between the woman and her doctor, or her closest relative, or her closest commandant, or mentor that she chooses. Looking at the damage that's been going on, and Spokane has a Planned Parenthood clinic also there. And there's people standing out there denying access to many of the women and men that are utilizing the Planned Parenthood facilities. Those facilities are open and available to many people that cannot afford clinics, to go into clinics. Not all of the dollars are utilized for abortions. And I would venture to say it's a very, very, very small percentage of dollars that actually do go into abortions. So I support the Planned Parenthood, and I support the option for women to make that choice. And a lot of I go back to rhetoric once again. Talk that's happening in some of our politics is what's causing a lot of this. Arsonists and vandalism going on in these facilities, and even some murders, some deaths that have happened to them in the past. That's not right at all, and we should not be encouraging that at all.
Okay, 45 seconds.
Well, I think we can ensure that women have access to important health care services and do it through the federally qualified clinics, and I think that is it's exciting to see the clinics that are already here in Eastern Washington, the healthcare that is available, and I have supported efforts to expand those services so that we do have access in communities throughout Eastern Washington. It's a top priority for me, no matter where you live, to ensure that you have access to quality and affordable healthcare.
Thank you. So our next question from the audience goes to Mr. Pakootas. Currently, the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, and it was last increased in 2009. Should the federal minimum wage be increased today? To what level? And should it be indexed to inflation?
I believe it should be indexed to inflation. I believe it should be raised also. $15 per hour may be even low, even in Eastern Washington. If you take a look at the minimum wage and how the cost of living has been rising in the past, and the salaries of CEOs and high-paid managers, if the cost of living for minimum wage had been kept up with, minimum wage would be around $22 per hour today. And that is still a struggle for many people to live on if they have a family of 4 or more. In the Spokane County area, in order for a couple to survive and to be able to pay their rent for a 2-bedroom apartment, they need at least $14.87 per hour. That is even struggling for them if they want to buy food and groceries and clothing for themselves also. If they want to afford a car or anything else, it's impossible for them. People that are working should not be living in poverty in the United States today, not at all. Spokane County alone, it's 28% of the people in Spokane County live below the federal poverty level. 21% of that 28 is children that live below that federal poverty level. We have over 3,000 high school students or students in public schools in Spokane County that live homeless. Many of them, as I said, are living way below the federal poverty rate level. So minimum wage, even at $15 per hour, is even a struggle for many families in Eastern Washington, where the economy is even lower than you'd look at in Seattle. So Seattle has been doing this for about a year now, and it's actually improved their economy and increased their businesses.
Thank you. Congresswoman, a minute and a half.
I really believe that this is a decision that should be left at the state level. When you look at the cost of living in different states and different regions, and even within Washington State, that it is best determined at the local level. I think the best thing that I can be doing to help create jobs and grow the economy, create more opportunities right here in Eastern Washington from a federal perspective, is really promoting solutions like tax reform and streamlining and simplifying our tax code and bringing down tax rates so that the burden of taxes on our family businesses is lifted. I also believe that we need to address the regulations. We have seen a record number of regulations right now, and it's government knows best. It's top-down policies being driven at the federal level that are making it harder on our family businesses. I just talked to a farmer in Stevens County who is going to give up farming because of new regulations coming out of the FDA that he says are just going to make it impossible for him. That is hurting our economy, it's hurting jobs, it's reducing opportunities right here in Eastern Washington. People need to be given the freedom and the opportunity to go out there and live their dreams rather than the federal government making it more harder on them.
All right, thank you. So our next question from the audience is to Congresswoman McMorris Rodgers. Do you support Donald Trump's immigration policies, which include building a wall, deporting undocumented immigrants, and banning nationals from countries associated with terrorism? If you do not support these policies, how would you address immigration policy in this country?
I believe that we need to take action to fix a broken immigration system. And I have supported border security measures. I believe it is important as a first step that we secure the border. That's fundamental to keeping us safe as a country. I also believe that we need to have a workable ag guest worker program. Right here in Washington State, farmers, orchardists, and others that need people to help pick fruit cannot get the labor that they need every year. Microsoft right now has hundreds of openings and are seeking employees from around the world, and yet they can't get in here legally. That's where we need a workable ag guest worker program. We need visa reform that would allow for those that want to come here to America that meet certain criteria would have the opportunity to do so. Those are the kind of approaches that I think. As far as the Syrian refugee program, I have supported a halt on that Syrian refugee program until we can ensure that they have been properly vetted. The FBI director, Comey, he told a joint session in Congress that they do not have the ability right now to vet these Syrian refugees to ensure that they are not a risk to this country. And we need to have policies in place, first and foremost, that are going to keep this country safe. And that's why I have supported a halt to that Syrian refugee program. I also supported visa waiver reform that did pass the House and the Senate, was signed by the President, because we need to be first taking steps that are going to ensure that we are safe as a country, that our policies ensure that we are safe as Americans, and then start fixing a broken immigration system.
Mr. Pakootas, a minute and a half.
We do have a broken immigration system, and it's been broken for hundreds of years, actually. You know, the solution isn't building a great big, beautiful wall or deporting 16 million. It is about 16 million undocumented citizens, or many of them are citizens, about 4 million citizens. Children that were born here. They're also going to be deported. They were born in the United States and they're citizens of the United States. Their parents may not be citizens. Once they're deported, and Donald Trump said he's going to keep the families together. So in order to keep the families together, he's going to deport all 16 million undocumented Hispanics. It's not only the Hispanic community either. The Hispanic community is a small group of immigrants in the United States. I understand the Asian community is coming close to being as large or maybe larger than the Hispanic community, undocumented. This has been going on for many years, I said, you know, and one of the ways that we can do this is also making a pathway to citizenship for many of these people that are in the United States that do have children as citizens here, and not splitting them up. I understand being taken away from your family. As a foster child, early on in my career, I guess is when I was very young. My career started when I was first born. But early on in my career, when I was in second grade, we were taken away from our family. So I understand that. I understand being taken away from your family, actually being taken away from your country, which happened to be our reservation. And that has damaging effects, devastating effects to young people. And it affects their lives all the way through. So I do not support the policies and procedures that nominee Trump has, and I don't think that the rest of American citizens should support that either.
Congressman, 45 seconds.
Yes, well, we need to fix a broken immigration system, and we need to stop politicizing this issue. This is an issue in which Republicans and Democrats, on behalf of the country, need to sit down and figure out how we're going to fix it. And I think we all recognize there's various aspects that need to be addressed, but let's stop playing politics with it and actually be problem solvers. And when you look at my approach as a representative, I'm someone that goes to work, works across the aisle on issue after issue to get results. And whether it's the Veterans Administration, whether it's the military, forestry, leading on issues important to Eastern Washington, I'm about working together to get results.
Okay, we have time for one last question. I'm going to give each of our candidates a minute and a half to respond to it, and we'll begin with Mr. Pakootas. What is the longevity of the concrete dams on the Columbia River, and what is your plan to fix them?
Fix it down. My plan to fix them would be to remove them. You know, and they've been an issue for Native Americans for, well, since Grand Coulee Dam was built for over 50 years now. And we finally was successful in winning our settlement in 1994 after 50 years of fighting with the federal government. But the dams, they have to be relicensed every 50 years. And that is basically the longevity of a lot of the concrete dams and the structures that are built. Many of them are not anchored. They're basically a pendulum that's sitting on the ground. They're not anchored. And after 50 years, they should be, there's a lot of major repair that's going to be needed on them. There's one dam, the Wanapum Dam down Lower River, that has a giant crack in it. And they had to shut that down for a little while and do a lot of major repairs. But they should have removed it at that point in time. Once they've lasted through their useful life and gone through their longevity of 50 years, then they should be removed. That's a perfect time to do that. Many of them are not utilized for what they were put in place in the beginning. For flood control and irrigation is what many of them were built for. And not many of them are utilized for that anymore. They've been converted to electricity, Chief Joseph Dam, Bonneville Dam, and many other dams down in Columbia. So once they've reached their useful life, they should be removed.
Thank you. Congresswoman?
When you look at the Columbia Snake River system and the tremendous impact that it's had on the Northwest, I think is a wise investment that was made. It's transformed this economy from the Pacific Northwest. The system was put in, and it had multiple use: hydropower, irrigation, flood control, barging. Barging prodded up and down the river is less impact on the environment than railroads or trucks. They have a multiple positive impact. Whether it's low-cost hydropower, whether it's the irrigation that has built this as one of the most productive agriculture regions in the country. Low-cost hydropower is the reason that we've had manufacturing and other industry in the Pacific Northwest. They have played multiple uses, and as far as the longevity of the concrete, that is addressed every time there's an inspection and every time we go through relicensing. They're looking to ensure that the concrete is holding up, and that needs to be a priority to ensure that they remain safe for all of us in Eastern Washington.
You have 45 minutes to report.
Oh, cool. I thought that we just had 1 minute apiece and that was it.
We have some extra time.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, it kind of surprised me, so I don't know what to say, but I'll jump in there, though. As I said, you know, we've been battling this issue for many, many years, and many of these dams have reached their useful life, and many of these dams are not utilized for the purpose that they were actually built for. And the federal government keeps soaking money into them, and taxpayer dollars keep soaking money into them, and it's not doing us any good. You heard her talk about salmon runs earlier, and we had some of the greatest salmon runs. The largest salmon fishery, second largest on the Columbia River, was at Kettle Falls, and that was the last place that the salmon could make it up the Columbia River. Thousands of Indians would fish there annually every year.
Congressman, I'll give you 45 seconds too if you'd like.
Oh, well, Just, when you look at the impact of the Columbia Snake River system on Eastern Washington, it's foundational on our economy. And because of technology, I believe that we're smarter. We have new improved fish ladders. We have turbines that have more capacity, and we're improving every day. And I don't think it has to be an either or. We can have the benefits of the dam. We can have the fish runs that we want to see, which is very important to our way of life, and we can continue to grow this economy and benefit from their contribution to this area and our economy.
Thank you. It's now time for our closing statements, and each candidate has 2 minutes to present their closing statement. We begin with Mr. Pakootas.
Okay, thank you. Also, thanks to Washington State University and Tom Foley Institute for hosting us tonight. That was great. Great debate and great discussion. I so appreciate the engagement in the democratic process, especially by many of the young people. That is a challenge to get them engaged and keep their hope up and get their trust built back into their government. The 5th District needs something that's been lacking for a couple of decades. That's leadership. I promise you that given the opportunity to lead, I will represent you in Washington, D.C., not corporate interest, and also not party interest, but your interest. My opponent and I stand in contrast. You have a choice. I'm not wealthy, but I do have many, many years of business experience, many years of political experience in tribal government, which I consider is a lot more difficult and a lot harder than federal government. I value cooperation and collaboration. I come from a culture that believes we have a duty to leave this world, this planet, a better place for our young people than how we received it. It's been too long since your voice has been heard in Washington, D.C. You deserve better. God willing, that's exactly what's going to happen come November 8th. I humbly ask for your vote and your support and the privilege to represent you in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thank you. Congresswoman?
Well, let me also thank the Foley Institute, all of you for being here, and Joe for an important discussion tonight. I think, well, obviously, this has been a unique political environment this year. And I think it's refreshing that we can have a conversation, and sometimes we won't always agree, but we don't have to be disagreeable. As I continue to seek your support to represent you in Congress, my goal is to be your voice in Congress, to be the people's voice, and to restore trust and confidence in representative government, and to lead on the important reforms that we need. I believe that it is fundamental that as Republicans, Democrats, and independents that we join in ensuring that the people's voice and the people's priorities are what is reflected in the Congress, but also in the federal government. And too many decisions right now are being made by an executive branch through rules or regulations, or a judicial branch that is legislating from the bench. We need to restore the people's voice, and that's done through representative government. I am on a mission to ensure that we institute the reforms necessary to restore that voice. I'm also working on VA reform to ensure that the VA is focused on the veteran, on forestry reforms, on accountability in government, which is so desperately needed. There's much work to be done. I am smarter today about how to lead on that and to get results for Eastern Washington. It's an honor to represent you in Congress, to be your voice, and to ensure that we help restore a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that will conclude tonight's debate. I wish to thank our candidates, Cathy, McMorris, Rodgers, and Joe Pakootas, for a very substantive debate tonight that stuck to policy and showed great respect and civility towards each other. I also want to thank all of you for coming out this evening. I want to remind all of you to vote. The election's coming up in just a couple of weeks. And now I also want to thank our partners tonight, Northwest Public Television and Northwest Public Radio, for broadcasting the debate tonight. We will post this debate on our website at foley.wsu.edu, and it will also be posted on the Northwest Public Television website as well as the Northwest Public Radio's websites. I am Cornell Clayton, and for all of us here at the Foley Institute and at Washington State University, good night.
Reliable, balanced, real. Election 2016 on PBS.